This is the Danger Close podcast, Beyond the Books with me, Jack Carr.
Welcome to the Danger Close podcast, an Ironclad original presented by SIG Sauer. My guest today is the great Steven Pressfield. His latest book, A Man at Arms, is available everywhere right now. And it was such an honor that he asked me to blurb it because I have been a huge Steven Pressfield fan for as long as I can remember. You might know him from Gates of Fire, Legend of Bagger Vance, Afghan Campaign, Killing Rommel, and the series of books that he has written on creativity, which are great, not just for authors, but anyone in the creative space. And I'd say anyone in general, because life is really all about leadership. And these books are really about taking accountability, slaying resistance, doing the work, and getting it done. So highly recommend The War of Art, Turning Pro, Do the Work, Authentic Swing. Absolutely incredible series. You can find out more about all of Steven's work at stevenpressfield.com. We recorded this in late May of 2020 up at Thunder Ranch in Oregon, where we were spending some time with Clint and Heidi Smith on the range. So enjoy this conversation. I sure did. Now, without further ado, the great Steven Pressfield. It's such an honor for me to sit down and talk to Steven. And this is the second time we've done something officially. The first time we did an Instagram live that I forget how long it went, but it went. We could have kept going for hours, it seems. So anyway, Steven, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here with you, Jack.
Yeah, and we should probably say where we are. So we are at Thunder Ranch in Oregon, in Lakeview, Oregon, which is a shooting school owned by Clint and Heidi Smith. And Clint has been in the industry for quite some time, and we are up here going to do a little shooting course together and record some content and hang out and get away from the cities for a few days. So here we are.
Well, it's great to be here, Jack. Let's fire away.
Yeah. So I think the best thing, because I have so many questions for you, and so I'm sure this will not be the only time that we do this.
Hope not.
But there's some things that I don't know about. Well, there's a lot that I don't know about you. So I wanted to explore from Marine Corps time, from boot camp time, through that, and then what happened in all those years between leaving the Marine Corps and when people picked up that first copy of either Gates of Fire or Legend of Bagger Vance and started down their reading journey with you.
Well, it was a long time, Jack. Can we have like an hour and a half?
Yeah, let's do it. Absolutely.
I mean, in a nutshell, I mean, I was in the Marine Corps Reserve, so I was in for like 6 years, going to various meetings and stuff like that. So I was in New York working as an advertising copywriter at Benton and Bowles and at Ted Bates and a couple of other places. And I had a boss named Ed Hannibal who quit to write a novel. And I don't know if you know this at all, but it was a hit. It was called Chocolate Days Popsicle Weeks, and it was a hit. So I was 23 or 24, and I thought, well, hell, I'll do the same thing.
Did you think if this guy can do it, I can do it?
Piece of cake, So my life immediately went into the toilet at that point. I spent a couple of years doing it, and it was like way over my head in terms of I had no clue what anything was. And I sort of, I was married at the time. The marriage blew up, and I wound up kind of on the road for quite a while, working various jobs and stuff like that, and feeling a tremendous sense of shame that I had failed at this novel that I tried to write, and that I didn't have I'd failed to be a provider to my wife at the time, et cetera, et cetera. So we can get into this in more detail if you want to, but I worked a lot of jobs and over a long period of time, and felt like I was really in the wilderness. It wasn't like, I know your career, you kind of felt like you knew what you wanted to write, and you got out of the SEALs, and you kind of, and I give you tremendous credit because you did a couple books on spec. And so that was sort of what I was doing, but over a much longer period of time with a lot more failure in there.
Well, did those books, that first one, did that become one of your first novels that got published eventually? No? Okay.
No, I did 3. Each one took maybe 2 years full time, and they never saw the light of day, and they shouldn't have. Like a couple of years ago, I took them out of the drawer, out of the back room, blew the dust off, and thought, well, maybe no, they definitely, no, it's not even close. Yeah,
interesting.
So
I bet there's a book right there about. We have War of Art, which has a cult following and has helped so many people around the world, not just in the creative space, but entrepreneurial space and personally, leadership wise. Have you ever taken some of those pages with some of your edits and your notes? And are there any of those in any of these books that I'm just not remembering right now?
No,
okay.
I mean, they just are in the dusty stack in the back. Yeah.
Got it. And during that time, you were you working your way across the country, or did you end up when did you end up in LA?
I actually was in California 5 different times, trying to make the move from the East Coast to the West, and I never could support myself. I worked a bunch of jobs. Like I drove trucks. I worked in oil fields. I taught school. I worked in a mental hospital. I picked fruit.
I remember that. That's in one of these. Is talking about the picking of the fruit is in there.
But also in that, so that it doesn't sound too much like On the Road by Jack Kerouac, I also would go back to New York and work in advertising. And I would save money, quit, go somewhere cheap, write another novel that nobody would buy, and that sort of filled that time. And then at some point, I think it was in 1980, I moved to LA.
Permanently? And that was the permanent move?
Yeah, I finally got to, and I wrote 9 screenplays on spec. None of them sold. And finally, maybe I'm getting into more detail.
No, I love it. No.
I
had touched on it in some of these, but I wanted to go in a little more depth.
I had an agent named Mike Werner, who was a really good agent, and he got tired of taking my stuff out and having it just bomb, sink without a trace. So he said, what if I teamed you up with an established writer and you could be kind of, the junior partner in that thing? So he did. And I worked for, 4 or 5 years with Ron Shusett, who did the original Alien. Oh, nice. He and Dan O'Bannon, and also did Total Recall. And so I worked with Ron and that was like a great apprenticeship for me.
While they were working on those scripts for Total Recall, or?
Yeah, I was like one of 35 writers on that,
Is that a writer's room?
No, I mean in sequence. One guy would go and another guy would go and another guy, and I was like number 27 or something like that. But so that sort of was how I finally started to make money as a writer and actually to support myself. And then Ron and I had a divorce, and then I had a kind of another small career just as a solo writer, a screenwriter. And then this was still let me think, it was almost 30 years after I first started trying to do this. The idea for the Legend of Bagger Vance came to me. And this is in, I think, the War of Art or somewhere. And but it came as a book instead of a screenplay. So anyway, I finally wrote that. And
how long did you, from the idea, how long did it take you to finally say, okay, I'm going to write this? And then once you started to write, how long did that take you to get to that finished product where you said, there's something here?
That's a great question. The idea came, and my first thought was, this is the dumbest idea that anybody's ever had. It's completely uncommercial. Who's going to want to read a mystical golf novel, right? Really dumb. And my movie agent at the same time thought the same thing. And he basically fired me. He said, if you write this, forget it. I've been working for years to get you a career going. Now you're going to drop out, and write a novel that nobody's going to buy, blah, 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 blah. So we had a mutual parting of ways. And then I think maybe it was like all the bad luck and all the failure that I've had over those years, the pendulum kind of swung back. And the book kind of found a publisher right away, found a movie deal right away. I mean, right away.
With a new agent. So now you've somehow found a new agent.
Yeah.
And that agent, good deal for that one.
Right away.
Nice.
And that kind of got me out of the movie business into the book business. And that was 1995, I started in 1967. So however long that was.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That's absolutely incredible. And
so that's why I'm in awe of you, Jack, that you knew what you were going to do and you did it, I
didn't mess around. I went all in. And when that second agent, I get asked questioned about agents all the time.
No, that's
I don't
good
have
because
good
it's
answers.
interesting. It's interesting.
Yeah, and I don't have good answers because I kind of I didn't know I needed one. So luckily I didn't do much research into that side of it. I put all my bandwidth into actually doing the writing instead of the business side of it, and figuring out the business side of it came later. But when you transitioned agents, how did you find your second one? Did you already have a relationship with that person?
That's another great question. I had, from working as a screenwriter, I had an entertainment lawyer named Larry Rose.
Okay.
And so I just went to him. I said, Larry, do you know any agents? And he said, let me hook you up with Jody Hotchkiss in New York, who worked for Sterling Lord, who was the guy who's still my agent now. He's 99 years old.
Wow.
And he did the original deal of Jack Kerouac's On the Road.
That's amazing.
In 1952, whatever it is. The offer was $900 and Sterling got him up to $1,000.
Hey.
So anyway,
hustled him.
So my lawyer, Larry Rose, turned me on to Jody Hotchkiss, who was really a books to movies agent.
Okay.
And working with Sterling Lord. So they took on The Legend of Bagger Vance right away. But this was after being turned down by, forever.
Wow, that's amazing. I get that question, and I can't really answer it because my path was a little different in that I knew from a very early age what I was going to do, and all those people I read growing up were my professors in the art of storytelling. And so when people think, "Oh, overnight success," well, yeah, unless you go back to age 7, and reading all these guys, and then at age 10, I'm reading Tom Clancy, and then I find David Morrell and Nelson DeMille and AJ Pollock and JC Pollock and AJ Quinnell and Mark Olden and all these guys back then who had protagonists with backgrounds that I wanted one day. Well, I guess it's kind of over many nights if you go from age 7 on, and then everything else that went into studying terrorism and warfare and counterinsurgencies and insurgencies, and then applying that in Iraq and Afghanistan and the southern Philippines and in Haiti and all these other places around the world. And I guess, overnight, but I don't think there's any such thing as an overnight success.
I mean, that was when we first met, what really impressed me about you, because I have tried to write thrillers. I've always wanted to write a thriller. And you do it as if you're rolling out of bed, and But when I started to ask you, if you remember what about the conventions of a thriller and the obligatory scenes and all that, how'd you know it? And when you started telling me about all the stuff that you'd read and all the things that you'd studied, I saw that, the depth of knowledge. You could do a PhD course in thrillers, with your eyes closed. So for anybody that's watching this or listening to this podcast, there's no such thing as an overnight success. And that, the depth of knowledge that you have, is like a brain surgeon in that thing. Absolutely.
Well,
and that's just the way it works. There's no shortcut for that.
I appreciate that. And it's, just like for the SEAL teams, just like studying all that, all the warfare and knowing the history of counterinsurgencies and studying what people wrote in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and how that evolved in the 80s and how different insurgencies then adapted to what different counterinsurgents were doing to them. That's part of the history of warfare. It's knowing your trade. And it's the same thing with writing. I think it's important to know the trade and not just to read a book and say, oh, maybe I can do this. Can I make money at this? And then, no, I think it's important to know where it came from. All those people that came before who moved the ball forward, who didn't just essentially copy somebody else out there, but that moved the ball forward, whether it was by a lot or by a degree, but just moved it forward, moved the genre forward. So I think it's important to know the history of what you're doing, just like in any profession, I would think. And just my experience comes from warfare, of course, but knowing the history of the thriller. And who wrote these things and at what point in time, what was going on in the world at those times when they wrote it, and why it resonated with people, or maybe why it took a little while to catch on and then it did, and why was that? And just knowing all that background, I think about that all the time as I'm writing, and I take it as a challenge and kind of as my responsibility to those people who laid the foundation for me to move the ball forward a little bit, even if it's just by the slightest little degree. And I owe that to the reader too. And I think that, I don't know if they thought about it quite in those terms. They may have, and if they didn't, then but doesn't matter because they still moved the ball forward, and they were still passionate, and they were still devoted to the trade and to the profession of writing.
Yeah.
So I look at it as like that torch has been handed from these guys through the generations here, and then now it's my turn to take it and just to do it as good as I possibly can for them and for the reader today. So I
it's like if you see, I'm just thinking as you're saying this, Jack, documentaries about Eric Clapton or Keith Richard, and they talk about how they studied the great blues guitarists. I'm sure Keith Richard sat for hours and hours and hours trying to get a lick exactly right that B.B. King did, or people that we've never even heard of, you know, and it's all an homage, on the shoulders of the people that went before you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They're moving it forward.
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of look at it. And there's still a lot of stuff out there that I was always a student of warfare before I got into the military, while I was in, and I continue the same thing today. But same thing with writing. I've always been a student of the craft, and I was before the military, during the military, and continue down that path today. So I think it's important to study the past so that you can then evolve moving forward.
Yeah.
So, and I love it. I love going back, and I love reading those old books and novellas, short stories through the lens of the time in which they were written, because it's so easy to go back and read something. Let's just pick from 1982, and someone reads that and they're like, "What?" And they don't really realize what was going on in the world at that time, what technology, what the thriller genre had been before, leading up to 1982, and just how groundbreaking maybe that novel was. When
you should teach a course in college, Jack. Really,
I love it.
Postgraduate,
I love all that stuff. So it's fascinating to me. And then for you, so switching from Legend of Bagger Vance to Gates of Fire. So how did I guess how does that one transition, and not just say, "Oh, I'm going to do another mystical football book or baseball book or something along those lines"?
As you know, when you write one and it has any success, then they want you to do another one.
Right.
So, which I had never even thought of what the next one was going to be. But, as you know, we've talked, I'm a believer in the muse, and I believe that as writers, we're following something from another level. And so I had no idea what I wanted to do after Bagger Vance, no idea. And I was reading Herodotus, which I did for fun. I love the Greeks, and came upon that passage of, we'll have our battle in the shade.
So great.
And I just thought, at that moment, I kind of thought, I know that guy, I felt like I could be in his platoon, and it really it's a sign of like great writing or great storytelling or something that Herodotus could write something 2,500 years ago, whenever that was, and reach right across the centuries, and you're right in it, So somehow I thought, okay, let me I could tell that story. Again, my first thought for that was, this is the dumbest idea anybody's ever had. I'm going to write a story. Americans don't care about anything that didn't happen in America, right? So I'm going to write about this other country that nobody's ever heard of, a place called Thermopylae that nobody can pronounce, nobody can spell, that was basically a losing battle, really wasn't emotionally. And so I thought it was really dumb, but I was just seized by it. And I'm sure you can relate to that, Jack. I was just seized by the idea. And, one thing as a writer, this, doing your first two on spec, you have to kind of ask yourself, have I got 2 years I'm going to give to this on the come, that there's going to be possibly no payoff at all? There's no contract, there's no deal, nobody wants anything. But I just was seized by the idea. And at that point, I had enough money to last for a couple of years. So that was how that came about. And again, I was amazed that, it sold very quick.
Wow.
Although I've had, I don't know if this is true for you or not, but books that I've sold to publishers, there's only been one buyer. Everybody else has rejected it. I've just found like one person, like my business partner, Sean Coyne, was the editor at Doubleday, who went for Gates of Fire, and he had to sell the hell out of it.
Wow.
So anyway, that's how that kind of evolved. So there are two books that were completely different.
Yeah.
But that was just the way it worked for me, being seized by both of them.
Right. No, that line is so great. And it speaks to everyone really across millennia. It's just, If there's one line or one or two lines anyway that really sum up the warrior ethos, that's it. That's it. Without missing a beat. Of our battle in the shade.
Yeah.
It's absolutely fascinating.
I mean, can I talk a little bit about that line for a moment?
So the warrior ethos, for those of you that, I'm sure if you're watching this and you follow me, you know about the warrior ethos, and you know who Steven Pressfield is, and you probably have this book and have gifted this book. And it was one of the ones, actually, so I was getting out of the military. I was assigned to the junior officer training course, and it was probably my most rewarding assignment in the military. And we had the officers, as they had finished SEAL training, and they still had another 6 months to go of SEAL qualification training. But we took them for a month, took them away from the class that they had been in BUDS with. Those guys continued on into SEAL qualification training. And we took the officers away for a month. And then they would rejoin the next class as it started in SEAL qualification training. So they had a whole new group of guys to lead that they hadn't been through Hell Week with, hadn't been through dive phase with, hadn't been through land warfare phase with. But they had a series of books. So it was very, very academic in nature for the first 3 weeks. And then we did a 1 week field training exercise up in the mountains, kind of get away from the flagpole and be up there together. But the warrior ethos was the book that they had to carry with them everywhere.
Really,
so every
I didn't know
SEAL
that.
officer gets this book, and they have a few other ones that they get as well. But this one is it's not as heavy as the others. So this one and this one resonates with everyone that gets it. And you don't have to be in the military to get something out of this. It's about leadership. It's about the struggle that everyone's going to have to go through, because you're going to get knocked down in life. You don't have to get knocked down in the military. You're going to get knocked down in life in general. And you're going to have to get back up. And really what defines us is how we get back up and move forward. But the warrior ethos has, is this the book that most people reach out to you on? Or what is the one book of everything that you've written that people reach out or mention the most when they meet you?
It's probably two. It's Gates of Fire and The War of Art.
Yeah.
But let me get back to flashback.
There's that.
We can always cut this out of the podcast if you want to, but I just wanted to say for a minute about that line from Thermopylae.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I'll set the stage and I'll tell you the story. You can cut this if it gets boring.
No.
So the 300 Spartans had arrived at the narrow pass of Thermopylae, and seized it, waiting for the Persians, supposedly 2 million of them, to arrive. And they had allies. They had about 4,000 allies, but they basically knew that they were going to die. They were there to hold this for a certain amount of time. And as I try to imagine myself into that thing, they must have been scared, right? This is it. And at one point, a native of the locality came running into the camp. Now, the Spartans and the Greeks had not seen the Persians yet. They had no concept of of how big it was. And the guy came in and he was kind of frantic, and he said, "Oh my God, I've seen them. They're ships. They got 1,000 ships, and there's so many of them that when their archers fire their volleys, it blocks out the sun." And I'm thinking, in that moment, if you're there, if you're one of those guys, you must have been pretty goddamn scared, And so Dionyscus just comes up with this quip and just says, "Good, we'll have our battle in the shade." And to me, what is so great about that is a couple things. First of all, I'm sorry to lecture here, but this is an interesting story. The Spartans had a real sense of humor that was based on something really short and pithy. It always wanted something short and pithy, and that was sort of contemptuous of the enemy. And also that so anyway, one of the things that's so great about "We'll have our battle in the shade," I think, is it doesn't deny the reality of the situation. It doesn't say we're going to win, we're going to survive, something's going to save us. It really says what's implicit in subtext is we're going to die, but, that we'll have the battle in the shade, It'll be, they can't scare us. Let them fire all they want at us. And the other thing about it is that it's very much about we, because I'm sure you know this way, way better than I do, Jack, that in those moments of fear, when you know you're going to face the enemy and it's really going to be bad, each individual withdraws into their own cylinder of terror, right? Of I'm going to die, or whatever it is. And so a quip like that brings it back to we. We're going to have our battle in the shade. Like the other thing that King Leonidas said, and these are all true lines. I didn't make these up for a book, or nobody made them up. The thing of on the final morning, he said, "Now eat a good breakfast, men, for we'll all be sharing dinner in hell." Mm-hmm. And that's another one of those things. That's kind of a laugh line, but it's also a we line. Yep. So that was one of the things. I couldn't have articulated it at the time, but when I read that passage in Herodotus, I think that was what grabbed me. I thought, that is the perfect thing for somebody to say at that time. A rah-rah speech would have been even worse, would have really drained what little courage you had. So anyway, I'm sorry to blather on with that, but I wanted to say that.
Oh yeah. And people, since the beginning of time, I would think, and certainly in my experience, is that humor downrange in the most dire of circumstances is probably your most powerful tool that you have to inspire people as they're looking to you for leadership, to being able to do something like that. Have just a couple word line, whether it's over the radio or whispered to somebody who needs it at the right time, at the right place. Like that's the art. That's part of the art of leadership, of combat leadership. And the guys get it too. It's the E4s down there, the E5 mafia, the E6, the chief that can walk by, the older enlisted guy that can walk by and say the right thing at the right time, just like that. Yeah. So I think that's why it resonates with people, particularly those who have been downrange. It doesn't matter which war, but from the beginning of time, that humor, that in the foxhole, that is a powerful tool. And there was a good gap though between writing Gates of Fire and having the Warrior Ethos come out. How many years was that?
I think there was like 6 or 7 books, because I then did 4 other books that were set in the ancient world. Yep. And this book, The Warrior Ethos, actually was designed to promote another book, a book called The Profession. Okay. And you'll know this from working in the publishing business. We couldn't get any real promotion for this book. The publisher wouldn't do anything for it. So Sean, my partner at the time, we thought, let's do another book. And we actually printed the original version of this. Was much smaller. It was, and it was designed to fit in a cargo pocket. And I don't know, maybe you knew this when you were downrange, but we printed and we gave away 18,000 of these. Amazing. To units of Special Forces, Marine Corps, whatever, in Iraq and Afghanistan, and in training here in the States. And the book is really, it's not so much me talking about that. It's, as you know, it's anecdotes from the ancient world, from the Spartans, from Alexander the Great, from the Romans and stuff like that, that sort of illustrate, and a lot of them are these quips, that somebody said. Oh yeah, and
they're fantastic. So for those watching, you can see my book is dog-eared and has yellow stickies and all the rest of it. And another great thing about this is that, especially for someone who might be intimidated by something that's a little longer, like no one's going to be intimidated by the size of this book. It fits in the cargo pocket. You can take it downrange. It doesn't add too much weight to your pack. That sort of thing. You can take it anywhere, and I think that makes it powerful as well, because it's so succinct and says so much in not a lot of pages. And it's just a beautifully done book. It's fascinating. I love it. So many team guys will take this out before an operation or before something they do and read a passage from it. So we were talking earlier that you probably have no idea how many people all over the world that you have influenced through your work and through your story.
Yeah, I don't.
And particularly through these. And people ask me all the time, what should I read? I want to be an author, or I want to do, what did you read? How did you learn how to do this? And of course I tell them the backstory and all that I read growing up and all that sort of thing. But these books right here on creativity, to include The Warrior Ethos. These ones, I read each one of these once, and then I put them within sight of me as I was writing that first novel. So it was like this right here. My computer was here, and I had these right there. So I didn't go to them and go back and look, but I read them all once, and you can see how many, they're all dog-eared there, all these important, cool pages. But just having them that close to me physically, if I got stuck on something, and I love how, I think it was when you were on Joe Rogan, how you said something about, hey, there's no such thing as writer's block. You're a professional. You sit down and write. The doctors don't get doctor's block. Truckers don't get trucker's block, or something along those lines. And maybe it's from here, because sometimes,
I say that?
sometimes, as you know, sometimes I've attributed. I don't know whether they came from the books or an interview I've read or listened on a podcast or whatever. They all kind of blended together over time. But regardless, I took that, and if ever I came to a point where I thought, oh, how is he going to get out of this? Or how many pages have I written here? How many more words do I need to get to? I thought, no, you're a professional. You sit down and you write. There's no such thing as writer's block. And that helped me immensely as I started.
Well, that makes me feel really good, Jack. It's great to, thank you for saying that.
Oh, of course. And actually on my flight after I got out of the military, summer of 2016, and the first book was pretty much done. I was still editing it, but I started the second one before I even had a deal, had an agent, had a publisher, all the rest of it. So I always knew I was going to write that second one. I always knew that True Believer, I was always going to do two, because if the first one didn't hit, then I was always going to do the second, because of the John Grisham story where he wrote A Time to Kill and he couldn't give that book away, and he could have quit right there, but instead he writes The Firm, and then off to the races we go. And we have a legal thriller every year since 1992 or whenever that was. So I always knew I was going to write two. So as I was doing the research, I flew to Africa, to Mozambique, get boots on the ground, get some local flavor I could weave into the True Believer storyline. But on that customs form, going into South Africa first, and then you hop up to Mozambique, one of those customs forms said profession. And I wrote writer. And I took a picture of it. But I did that because of you, and because, hey, you're a professional, you sit down and write. So Turning Pro, one of these books that if you read them all, you'll probably start with the War of Art, and then you'll go to Turning Pro, or Do the Work, The Authentic Swing, all fantastic. But do the work, Turning Pro. You decide in your head to flip that switch, become a professional. This is how professionals act. You sit down and you do the work. And so yeah, I wrote writer in there, took a picture of it. Even though I didn't write author, because I didn't quite have anything published. It wasn't didn't have a publishing deal, but I was a writer. And that was my profession. And I had switched in my mind from being a SEAL to now being out, making that transition, and now I'm a writer. And so it was pretty cool to write that on the customs.
That was very wise of you, Jack, because I know for me, for like 30 years, I couldn't do that. If anybody had said to me, are you a writer? I'd say no, because I haven't done anything, but I was wrong, because I really think once you commit to it, you are a writer, or whatever it is that you want. You're a warrior, whatever it is. So, you were very wise to do that, because it's self-reinforcement, and that's the name of the game in anything.
Well, it wasn't my wisdom; it was you. It was. Thank goodness I found these books and read them all. No, I appreciate it. And I point people towards these all the time. And actually, going back to something else you said about investing time in something, and is it worth 2 years of your life, 3 years of your life, with not knowing if you're going to get something published? Is there going to be a return on that investment of time? And David Morrell told me, and I think he writes about this in The Successful Novelist. He writes a letter to himself at the start of every project. And he writes a letter to himself talking about why it is worth it for him to invest 1 year, 2 years, 3 years in all the research and the writing that goes into something. And then he'll print that off and read it back. And if it's a good letter and it makes sense, then it's right there. It's not just something that's arbitrary, or it's in the back of your mind, or you think maybe it'll pay off, or I'm kind of interested in this thing. No, you've sat down, you put the thought into it enough to write yourself a letter saying, this is why I want to write this book. And it's because I want to go back maybe to 1873, and I want to explore that time period, and I want to get to know those people, and I want to tell this story. And this is why it's worth it for me to do that, and why I'm going to become a better, fuller person because I invest those 2 years, even if I don't get a return on that investment monetarily, if it's not a financial success or it doesn't even get published. I've still invested that time and I've made myself a better, fuller person because of it. And if it does get published, people that read it will become better, fuller people because they took the time to read it.
Oh, that's great.
It's really good advice. And I haven't sat down to do that yet on a project, but I probably will in the future.
I mean, I would agree with that completely, what David Morrell says, that because if the answer is, why am I doing this? I think it's going to be a hit, or I want money, or I want recognition. In my opinion, I know a lot of people do it that way, but you're wrong.
Yeah.
And you're on the wrong side of the spiritual thing. Yeah. I think, or to look at it in another way, if you look at it from the point of view of the muse, of the goddess that is kind of inspiring you and had put that idea in your head, if you don't do it, there's going to be a price to pay.
There you go.
You know, it's a psychological, or I don't know on what level, on the soul level, I suppose. And so I think David Morrell's exactly right that you're seized by something. It's really, for me, you getting an assignment from the goddess, just like you would get it in the military. You know, here are your orders.
Right.
Here's your orders packet. And you know, do you have a choice? Well, maybe I won't do this. You know, you really don't have a choice. And I also find, and I'm sure you agree with this too, Jack, that when it's legitimate and you really are getting it from this other dimension, you get a tailwind when you start. You know, a weight lifts off your shoulders and you are fired with an enthusiasm for something. And even in the real world, events start to break in your favor, at least for a while. You always are going to hit, you know, resistance points along the way. But yeah, so I would agree with that. I've never heard of that, writing a letter to yourself. I'd sort of do it in my mind.
Right.
I just ask myself, am I out of my freaking mind to want to do this thing? And usually I'm just so seized by it that I don't have a choice.
Yeah, it's that calling. It's that you can't not do it.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be miserable to sit down and do something just because you think it might be a hit, or there might be financial gain at the end of it, or you'll get some recognition at the end of it. That'd be just kind of like everything else I don't want to do. That's why I'm not in finance, or I'm not an attorney. I don't do anything else.
Although a lot of people do it that way. A lot of writers do it that way, but I don't know. But, you know, speaking, did you see that there was a documentary about Linda Ronstadt that's been on, called Linda Ronstadt, The Sound of My Voice.
Okay.
It's really great. If anybody hadn't seen it, they should see it.
Okay.
But she makes a point a few times, you know, Linda Ronstadt was not a writer of material, but she would find great songs and make them her own. You know, like once she sang, you know, Poor, Poor, Pitiful Me, or Desperado, or nobody else could sing it again, you know, because she was so great. But what she would say was, I can't not sing that song.
That's great.
And that's really sort of the same thing that we're talking about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You can tell when you read it. I think as a reader, you can tell if someone is invested in that material and invested in that process for the right reasons. I think you can tell.
Yeah.
There's something that rings truer about it when it's a calling rather than just
you can tell on the first page.
Yeah, rather than just a career move.
Yeah.
I think you can definitely, the reader can tell. And especially today, when you're talking about it, or you're posting pictures about it, or whatever else, like it's you can just tell.
Yeah,
people have that sixth sense about things, and it's innate to them that they have that. You can tell things about people and about what they're selling, and if they're really behind it and really invested in it for the right reasons or not.
You know, this is a really interesting question. I've never been able to define in my own mind. It'd be great if we could do it right while we're talking, but it also applies, like I'm thinking about the first 3 novels that I wrote that were no good. They were sort of inauthentic in a different way. It wasn't like I knew what I was doing and I was doing it for the wrong reasons, but I didn't know what I was doing and I was doing it for the wrong reasons, in the sense that I felt like I wasn't a real person. I didn't have a real sense of myself on the planet. I felt like I was trying to write my way out of that. And So there was something like if you were to read these 3 books that didn't get published, you could tell it right on the first page that I was sort of trying to write above my head or prove to myself that I existed on the planet. And that's like the worst reason in the world, although I think you have to go through that stage, or at least I did. And what I really couldn't really define as we're talking, Jack, writer to writer, is what changed. But at some point, it did change.
Mm-hmm.
And I then could write and you'd read the first page and you go, this is for real. And it wasn't a matter of skill either. I'm trying to define it.
Yeah, it's almost like that Zen state or that flow state, or that your calling matches with the right time and the place and material, and you're just called to do it rather than forcing it. It seems like it's that natural thing. You can't not do it. You're naturally called to it, I think, rather than, okay, I want to write a book. What should I write a book about? Okay,
yeah.
This sounds kind of interesting. Okay, let me dive in and force it.
And it has something to do with removing the ego from it. I'm just saying this now as we're talking. I don't even know, but for me, those early books were full of ego and real needy ego, you know? And at some point, I think maybe you flip a switch, you turn a corner, and there's a certain element of giving a gift to it, that you're writing for the reader and wanting to take them on a ride, you know, on a trip, on an e-ticket trip, if you can. Anyway, I don't know. We're probably getting too deep into some of this stuff. But,
no, I love it. You can tell. I mean, you can tell that you're called to write these things, and you're doing what you were born to do, and now you're sharing it with that journey with the rest of the world through these books on creativity. And I wanted to ask, where did the idea of course, the muse has been around for a long time, but how you interpreted that muse and that resistance that comes along, and how did you merge those two? Like, when did you in your head say, there's this thing called resistance and there's this muse out there, and you know what, let me share this with some people here in the War of Art, and then these other books as well. Like, when were you in 1985 saying, this resistance thing, it's getting me?
No, in fact, it took me a long time to sort of define it in my own head that way.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. Because bottom line was I was just getting my ass kicked by resistance, you know, being afraid to finish something, you know, going the wrong way once I was in it. And it was just defeating me over and over and over. And I had no idea what it even was or it even existed. Mm-hmm. And I'm not even sure when the idea sort of coalesced to name this force, resistance. But I very much felt when I would sit down to the keyboard that there was this force, this negative force radiating off the keyboard with a blank page saying, you know, do something else, you're no good, et cetera, et cetera. And at some point, I sort of gave it a name in my mind, but I'd been doing this for a long time, for like 15 years before that even crossed my mind. And then when friends would come to me, and I'm sure you get this all the time, Jack, and say, I've got a book in me. I know.
I do now.
My uncle's story, my grandmother, you know, across the prairie. And I would sit up with my friends like all night long, you know, till 2 a.m, trying to psych them up, you know, you can do it, you know, and they would all come up with all the reasons, I can't do it. I've got a job. I've got a husband, blah, blah, blah. And I would sort of define for them this thing, resistance, you know, and say, that's not your voice. It's this thing, da-da-da-da-da. And finally and of course, nobody ever did. Nobody ever wrote it. Nobody ever listened to me, you know, and one time I had a sort of a break between books, like a few months, and I thought, well, let me just write this down. And then when anybody asks me again, I'll say, here, read this.
Saves a lot of time that way.
Yeah. And
then you took it one step further and you can say, buy my book. Here's my website.
I never thought about
It's available here.
Yeah. But that came out in 2002. So I'd already been trying to do this stuff for about 20-something years or more than that.
That's amazing. Yeah. And then the latest one is Nobody Wants to Read Your Shit in this series. Is there another one?
Well, actually, there's one called The Artist's Journey that I don't,
What? Did I miss one?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Oh, I got to give that to you, Jack. Yeah.
I'm going to buy it. Let me buy it.
Oh, okay. That'll be $1.75 in my pocket. I appreciate it.
I get how that works.
Yeah, that's the most recent one.
Oh, interesting. I don't know how I missed that one. But yeah, thank you for doing this. And before we we move on here, maybe we should talk about why we're doing up here at Thunder Ranch. People might be interested in that. Is the last time you shot something, was it Paris Island?
Well, no, I think it was at Camp Lejeune when we were actually out in the or in the reserves, but it's been a
Was it Paris Island? Did you
I have
go
not.
to
Yeah.
Paris Island?
Yeah.
Wow.
But I have not shot a weapon in however long that is, a long time.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a day or two.
So actually we're here at Thunder Ranch because you are very good friends with Clint and Heidi, and you invited us. Diana, my girlfriend, is sitting over there, and me. And so otherwise we would never have known or even come here. You know? So thank you.
Oh my goodness.
We haven't done anything yet. We haven't been out on range. We don't know what we're doing. But I'm looking forward to seeing what it feels like.
Amazing.
Amazing.
And maybe there's some, and you said, was it an M14 that you shot back in the Marine Corps?
Yeah.
So maybe there's one of those around here we can dig out. I'm sure Clint has one, so we can pull one of those.
I'm really interested to watch you shoot because that's the real deal.
Well, it's once again, I made that transition from the military, and in my head, I flipped that switch, and that is something that I did, and it's a huge part of me going forward. But I don't live back there. But same thing, I try to keep my skills up as best I can, and get out and shoot whenever I get the opportunity. Just keep those skills up, because I think it's my responsibility as a citizen and as a husband, as a father, to protect my family, and just that piece of self-reliance has been with me from the earliest of times. I don't remember ever as a kid not being interested in survival, or not being interested in how to box or wrestle or whatever it is, or improving my martial skills, shooting in particular. So I'm excited to get on the range. This is going to be awesome. Yeah, amazing. And we've been going for 45 minutes or so. So I want to wrap this one up. And before we do, though, I want to thank you so much for inspiration, for sharing your story, and more so for sharing your gift with the world.
Hey, thank you, Jack, for having. Thanks for your friendship, and I hope that this goes on for a long, long time, for the rest of the duration.
Me too. Thank you so much, and we'll do this again sometime.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you for tuning in to the Danger Close podcast, an Ironclad original presented by SIG Sauer. You can find out more about Steven Pressfield at stevenpressfield.com. Be sure to pick up his latest book, A Man at Arms. Definitely read Gates of Fire, Legend of Bagger Vance, Killing Rommel, Afghan Campaign. He has been mentioned in quite a few of my reading lists, and you can find those at officialjackcarr.com, or you can go to Instagram at Jack Carr Book Club. So pick up his books on creativity, check out everything he has going on, go to the website, follow him on his social channels, and I cannot wait to find out what he is working on next. You can go to my website, officialjackcarr.com, to find out what I have going on there. You can pre-order In the Blood, which is coming out in May of 2022, the 5th book in the James Reese series. You can follow me at Jack Carr USA on the social channels, and you can go to jackcarrusa.com for the merch. Until next time, take care, stay safe, be strong, keep fighting.